And you know, as I travel around the U.S. and tell stories, I'm often asked if I know our next storyteller, Donald Davis. And when people ask, they have this wistful gleam in their eyes. Because I think in that moment, even just saying his name, they are transported back to stories that they have heard him tell. Or maybe they take a journey right back to their own childhood. So I'd say we are all prepared to enjoy Donald Davis.
Thank you, Connie. When I was 8 years old, my daddy decided he would teach my mother to drive. She did not drive, nor did she want to learn to drive. But he was absolutely determined that it was going to happen. She was in her 30s. He was nearly 20 years older, in his 50s, and we had a 1948 Plymouth that had a clutch and was straight drive. I also had a little brother. He was about 6 years old, and there was nothing to do with the two of us, 8 years old and 6 years old, except put us in the back seat where we could help. It was the greatest show on earth. My mama was sitting in the front seat of that car. It had a big, thick, white plastic steering wheel. She had a death grip on the steering wheel. Later, when we sold that car, you could run your hand around the steering wheel and feel where she had squeezed it down while she was learning to drive. And my daddy was sitting over there trying to explain to her how you work two feet to make three pedals go up and down. She was an elementary school teacher. She was trying to turn that into a math problem, and she couldn't get a whole number out of it. And I was sitting in the back seat watching everything, including my little brother, who in those days without seat belts was riding where you rode when you were scared, down in the floorboard, so that with every breath he could kick the back of her seat and scream, "Don't let her drive. Don't let her drive. She's gonna kill us all." It was wonderful. Yeah. Well, in spite of all that help, she actually learned. And when she was almost ready to go get her driver's license, my daddy, the last thing, he said, "You need to learn to start off on a hill if the red light turns red." She said, "There's only one red light in Haywood County." He said, "But it turns red." And so we went out to Hazelwood, and we went around that little loop about 4 times till finally it turned red. And I still remember sitting there at the top of that hill, watching my mother with the death grip on the steering wheel, both of her feet as hard as she could mash on the brake pedal, and her left leg locked with the clutch flat on the floor. My daddy with the biggest grin on his face you've ever seen. And my little brother stopped screaming for a few minutes to figure out what to scream next. My mother had her eyes closed because she was in prayer. She was praying that the second coming would occur before the light turned green, because she had no idea what to do, and she thought Jesus might do better. Well, the light turned green and her prayer was half answered. One foot moved. Her right foot came off the brake pedal. It hit the accelerator, went all the way to the floor. Her left knee did not unlock. And with that 6-cylinder Plymouth roaring wide open, here we started rolling backwards right down through the middle of Hazelwood. It's a good thing there was no traffic in Hazelwood, but my mother's steering was off about one bump on that steering wheel, and we drifted across the street, bumped over the curb, ended up in Clyde Fisher, who was the mayor, in Clyde Fisher's yard. They thought somebody was knocking on the door till they came out there. And there was a Plymouth under the porch. Well, we got home, and my daddy looked at my mother and he said, "You can drive about as well as an 8-year-old. Whoa. Who was 8 years old? I had always been fascinated with cars. And my dad would get me on his lap when we were going to my grandmother's house down the old dirt road and let me steer once we were off of the paved road. Every time we got in to go anywhere, he'd push the clutch in, let me reach over and turn the key and start the car. And whenever he would push the clutch in to change gears, he'd let me move the lever. And he looked at me and said, "Well, why don't you go out there and show her how an 8-year-old can drive?" Well, I went outside, got the Plymouth started. It was easy. And I hunkered down in the seat, pushed the clutch down in there, got it in reverse because that's going to back up a little bit from where the garage was. I didn't know that the steering wheel was turned a little bit. And as I tried to let the clutch out the way my daddy did, of course I didn't get it right, and that Plymouth jumped backwards. Out of the driveway, through my sandbox, it hit a dogwood tree, ka-wham, and bent in the back bumper. You should have seen the smile on my mama's face. She looked at my daddy and said, "What do you have to say now, mister?" He said, "I'll stick with what I said. An 8-year-old can drive as well as you can." Now, folks, that's as far as I'm going to take this story. Because if you've ever had a male person in your family who has said something as unfortunate as that to a female person in your family, you can finish this story about as well as I can. Thank you.